Hello there. Good afternoon. Welcome to the session today. This is a different type of an experience meeting you all virtually, but I hope that some of you who are joining are able to see me okay and are able to, uh, enjoy the session that we will do today. Uh, so without much further ado, let me get started. The topic of the session today is successfully implementing Kanban with portfolio and upstream Kanban. Um, let us go into the sort of basic premise of what I want to talk about today and see if you are able to relate to that. So if you look at Kanban's fundamental allure, Kanban's fundamental attraction or value proposition, it is a evolutionary change method, and which means that you are able to uh, continue to do what you're doing today, apply incremental change, and slowly and gradually at your own comfortable pace, improve as your team is able to take those improvements. And so as a result, the changes are small, the improvement is gradual, and as you continue to improve, the team is able to absorb those changes. However, the problem is that many organizations that have implemented change initiatives are used to what we call disruptive change. So typically, when organizations have done it historically, they have used or they have implemented changes such as Six Sigma or CMMI or later on Agile with Scrum type of initiatives. They have been used to big change initiatives. They have been used to a large organizational change where there is a continuous sort of focus on the size of the project, the amount of funding that is there on the project, and how you overhaul the the process, the development practices, as well as of course the organization structure. So if you don't do all of that, and if you are doing this only at an incremental team level, then very often it is possible that the leadership is unaware of the changes that are going on. And because they're unaware, they're unsupportive of the team level leadership that is being shown by the teams that are implementing Kanban. Another problem is that when you're doing something which is seen to be small and maybe cheap or free, it is not given as much value as if you were spending a lot of money on. The moment you spend more money, the moment you have a lot of budgets allocated to something which is a big change, then people pay attention to it, and therefore people are more involved. They value it more, and so there is greater attention at the organization level. And this is a challenge that I think Kanban teams face when they are starting to implement a incremental change or an evolutionary change, when the organization is much more used to revolutionary or bigger change. And so, in that sense, the concept of evolutionary change is too revolutionary. And that is sort of the fundamental uh, aspect of the challenge that Kanban teams face when they're implementing Kanban. So before I go into the presentation in any more detail, a little bit about myself. So I am a co-founder at Digite. We've been around for nearly 2 decades, and I have run different functions in that organization with product management, marketing, consulting, and services. And as a result of that, I have worked closely with all of our customers in terms of implementing change initiatives, implementing Kanban in specific, and also, of course, implementation of our own products. And that's where, of course, we've got a lot of the experience that I speak from. Swift Kanban was a product that we launched in 2011, so nearly about 10 years now that we have been working with Kanban and with the Kanban community. And I'm very fortunate that as a result of that, I have benefited from that. My company has benefited from that, and of course, our product has matured as a result of our engagement with the Kanban community. Um, I myself have been lucky enough to go through some of the training that the Kanban University offers, and I'm an AKT and an AKC, and I work closely with our customers for some of the Kanban implementations that they do. A little bit on the personal side, we live in the San Francisco Bay Area, and you can see the Golden Gate Bridge behind us. I have a wife and daughter who's going to now second year of college, and we also have a dog. His name is Tigger. Um, Tiger is very demanding, as you can see on the bottom left here. He's asking me to take him for a walk while I'm working on my laptop. Um, I'm a foodie, and in particular, I like to eat a lot of meat. Not a very popular notion these days, but I was fortunate last year, especially, to go to different parts of the world, including Brazil, and you can see the typical meats that you can get in Brazil when you eat outside in the, I think it's called a churrascaria. And I also went to Scotland and I had a very traditional Scottish breakfast, and also tea and sandwiches or tea and toast in India and in United Kingdom. So as you can see, I'm a big tea fan as well, and food that goes along with it. Uh, in the recent past, I discovered this application called Smule. The Smule name is cut off from here. But if you're into karaoke singing and if you like to sing in general with other people, then I encourage you to try Smule. It helps you connect with all kinds of people around the world and sing different types of songs. Here is one that I was recording from Simon and Garfunkel, Homeward Bound. Um, and then finally, of course, just a little bit more about what I do in spare time. And one of the things that I have taken up in the last 3, 4 years is going on my motorbike with some friends, sometimes my daughter, and we have gone to some very interesting areas such as the Crater Lake and Death Valley. And here you can of course see the famous Bixby Bridge, which is on the southern side from here in the Big Sur part of the California coast. So anyway, just a little bit about what I do and how I'm involved with the Kanban community, and where this presentation is coming from and based on our observations and our experience learning with our customers. So to share with you a little bit about our experience and findings, one thing that we have seen is that there is a clear distinction between companies that are succeeding with Kanban and those that were not succeeding. There is a clear set of things that that are different from between one and the other, and we will talk a little bit about that. In general, of course, in enterprise software, which is the kind of business that we are in, customers come and go. There is a certain shelf life to all enterprise tools, and after some amount of time, maybe it is 3 years or 5 years or 7 years, uh, teams want to change the tools that they're using, and therefore they may replace one tool with another. And so therefore companies come and go. But what we have seen is that some companies stay when it comes to implementation of Kanban. So they stay the long term with them. They implement the Kanban successfully, and they implement the tool that they are using successfully as well. And those who stay have again two characteristics. There are those who stay at a low level of maturity, which is what I call the visualization level, using Kanban and Swift Kanban predominantly as a work tracking tool. So they might have been using a project management tool, they may be using email and calendar, or some to-do list or a checklist type of tool, and they may replace that with a Kanban board. But essentially, the Kanban board gets used in a very similar way as they were using these other tools. But then there are others who go up the maturity ladder very quickly and they improve beyond their own expectations. These are the companies that are of interest to us because we want to understand what these companies do that helps them really understand and appreciate the Kanban method in at a much greater depth, and of course with far greater outcomes which are beyond their own expectations. So we started to dig deeper. We have been in this, like I said earlier, in this business for about 8 or 9 years, and we have seen companies, approach Kanban and approach lean and agile initiatives in different ways. And we wanted to see which are these companies that become more successful in benefiting from the principles of the Kanban method. So here is what we found. So we found that typically when companies or teams implement Kanban, starting from a team level, they tend to be typically weak. Not everybody, but some of them, or rather, I would say many of them, tend to be weak when they implement at a team level. They typically are a proto Kanban level 0 maturity, which is mainly focused on visualization, like I was just saying. The one thing that they do beyond visualization is that they implement or they define the WIP limits at different stages of their workflow. But the adherence to the WIP limit, the actual following of the WIP limit, remains somewhat weak. Other policies that they may have are not made explicit, and especially policies that they may have with respect to their stakeholders, they are almost non-existent. And then one of the big principles around Kanban, which is to implement pull, although pull and flow are a big part of implementation of Kanban, but in reality, what happens is that pull per se remains a question mark, which means that team members still tend to get assigned work rather than pulling work when they have capacity. And it is done maybe collaboratively. They may do it during a daily stand-up meeting or in a weekly replenishment meeting, etc. But pure pull, where a team member sort of understands their capacity, understands that they have capacity to do work, and therefore pull a card, that remains, in my experience, somewhat weak. So let's take a closer look at that. One of the other things that happens, especially in software development teams and IT teams, is that their problems that they were initially trying to solve with Kanban, they continue to persist. So, for example, one of the big challenges that most software teams face is a very high demand from management and customers because they have products that they're maintaining. They have a lot of demand for new features, and new enhancements. These continue to remain high, or they continue to expand as they would have without Kanban as well. One of the big challenges that they face, and many teams don't often realize that, is that their backlog management, backlog grooming practices continue to suffer. They continue to remain poor. And this is one aspect of their overall process that doesn't get addressed when they're approaching it from a team approach, from a team level implementation of Kanban. One of the key problems that most teams have is a lot of interrupt driven environment where they get asked to stop what they were doing and work on something more important, and this results in a lot of context switching, and as a result a lot of impediments to flow occur in their overall workflow, and the quality of work suffers, and this continues to remain a problem for them. And in general, the fundamental sort of benefit that they seek from Kanban, which is to reduce overburdening and to improve flow, those remain in place. And as a result, while there may be some initial excitement about implementing Kanban, very quickly that dissipates, and it becomes sort of business as usual, so to speak. One of the other challenges that we see is that because of the team level implementation of Kanban, the leadership in the organization also remains disconnected. They are simply not aware of what is going on at the team level, so therefore they do not have any way to relate to that work that's going on. And that has its own implications. Firstly, there is no real involvement. Of course, if they're not aware of it, then they cannot be involved in it. And if they're not involved, therefore, then there is a lack of ownership in the implementation of Kanban. Secondly, because they're unaware and because the initiative is more at a team level, there is typically insufficient funding for the Kanban initiative. And one of the biggest challenges that happens because of the lack of funding is poor quality of training. The initial one or two people who might have got trained on Kanban, they may have good knowledge of the Kanban principles and deep knowledge of the Kanban method, but the rest of the teams or other teams that start to follow Kanban because of what they're learning from this team, they never get, or very often they don't get, good quality of Kanban training. And as a result, the understanding of the Kanban method and the Kanban principles remains very poor across the organization. And like I said earlier, Kanban becomes simply a reporting tool and a work tracking tool rather than as an improvement method overall. So the question then we asked ourselves was, is Kanban growing a butt? Are we seeing an environment where there is Kanban butt when you ask? So this is the problem that we used to have with traditional agile teams, especially teams that were implementing Scrum, that if you ask them that, hey, are you doing Scrum? They would respond by saying, yes, we do Scrum, but, because there are those various challenges that were there with implementing Kanban, implementing Scrum. And what we are concerned about, and what I'm concerned about, is that perhaps many of the Kanban implementations also suffer from the same problems that Scrum had. And those problems relate to mindset and culture, they relate to leadership involvement, and they relate to the fundamental problem with managing or initiating change, where there is a temporary change, but then it quickly becomes replaced by business as usual, and teams revert back to the old ways of doing business. And this is a big concern, because if Kanban is suffering from the same problem, then Kanban is not really helping teams realize the benefits of evolutionary change, where they can really implement change at their own pace, but result in lasting change. And so we wanted to study this further. And so we, of course, find that there are many teams that are succeeding with Kanban. And so there is hope for us. And so let's take a look at closer what are these teams that are succeeding with Kanban instead of sort of having the same problems that Scrum teams have. So of course we know that many organizations are succeeding. Clearly Kanban in general is growing, and of course the number of customers that we have in Digite is growing. And so we are able to clearly say that there are certain companies that are succeeding with Kanban. And they're doing it right now. So it's not as if it is something that happened in the past or something that may happen in the future. These are companies that are succeeding right now. So the question comes, how are they doing it? What are they doing different that is resulting in better implementation of Kanban for these companies? So we've seen there are two broad styles of engagements that we have seen ourselves. And let's go to each of them. There is what I call a type 1. These are teams that get trained. They define their boards, or they already have their boards, and they create them in Swift Kanban when they're implementing Swift Kanban as a tool. And they're off. They're ready. They set up their boards and they're off to the races. They start to work with their Kanban boards. There is a second type of companies, type 2, where they don't rush to put things on the Kanban board and start to work with their Kanban boards. They have a lot of discussion before they start to actually work with their Kanban boards or even set up their Kanban boards. And these discussions tend to be around how do they organize their Kanban boards. They are really trying to understand whether they should define their Kanban boards by teams, they should do it by products that they support, or their customer that they support. There is a lot of debate and discussion on just exactly how they should organize their Kanban boards. So the key question they're really spending a lot of time upfront on is how do we design and how do we organize our boards? And these are teams that are indicators of some of the other things that we see in organizations that are implementing Kanban in this manner. So some of the early indicators of these type 2 engagements, as I call it, are the following. Firstly, there is an overall style that these organizations have. There is firstly, I think, an overall organization-wide focus on lean and agile, which may not be just software and IT, it may be outside of software and IT as well. And very often it is. That is being supported by a reasonably strong lean agile center of excellence, or a team that is actually helping the organization understand their lean and agile principles, training them, helping them train in those principles, and really getting them to have a deep understanding and knowledge of those principles. There is a separate aspect of some of these companies, which is that they have a strong culture of portfolio management. They have been doing portfolio management for a long time, and they understand some of the values that portfolio management brings, especially in terms of making sure that they have a overall alignment in the organization between strategy and execution. So that is a separate but a clear aspect of culture that exists in many of these organizations. So this is one, what I call overall style that exists in organizations. The second aspect is that there are two noticeable patterns of discussion that we see ourselves when we go into these organizations and engage with their teams that are implementing either Kanban or Swift Kanban or both. There is firstly a very clear top-down thinking in the way that they look at their Kanban boards and the way they look at their implementation of Kanban. They're looking at it from either a PMO or managing these portfolios or programs, or leadership engaged in defining the overall design of the Kanban board. That's one way of looking at their implementation of Kanban, which is a top-down way of looking at it. The second very clear approach is where teams start not only thinking about their own board, their own workflows, but they're also discussing and talking about slightly more extended value streams. They may not be looking at the entire value stream of their function that they're involved with in the organization, but they are definitely looking at a slightly more extended workflow rather than just their own workflow. So these are two, I believe, encouraging signs of how you can see that they are going to be more mature about how they implement Kanban and how they're going to actually stay with Kanban and the tools that they use to implement the Kanban method. And so if you look at it from an overall perspective, these are some of the characteristics of Kanban. Sort of summarize what I've spoken. Firstly, there is a strong and typically a senior champion. You want to have somebody, there is usually somebody who is at a level that they command reasonable respect, not just for their knowledge of Kanban, but simply because of their own standing in the organization. They are respected for who they are in general, and of course, they now bring knowledge of the Kanban method and the Kanban principles. Typically, it is not just one person. It is typically a complete sort of a team, a task force that is set up, usually a lean and agile center of excellence or a task force that is responsible for implementing the lean agile transformation initiative. Typically, then they will also have some level of medium to mid to senior level involvement of management. And of course, you can understand very easily that when you have a team that is involved in implementing lean and agile, that the team needs funding, and that funding means that these senior level leadership has to be involved. And then, of course, because of all of these factors, there is a wider focus on lean and agile, not just in the technology parts of the organization. So it is possible that these teams or these organizations have lean and agile being implemented in other aspects, whether it is HR or procurement or product design or marketing or other such functions, where they will also clearly benefit from lean agile principles and the lean agile method. So there is a greater focus than just IT and software. And not everywhere, but in some of these organizations, there is also a reasonably strong portfolio management culture that I talked about earlier. So in summary, what are they doing different? When we kind of sat back and thought about this, and we said, okay, what are these different things that they're doing, and how can we summarize or abstract it out into principles of the Kanban method that we have understood and that we've seen our customers implement? Then I think there are two clear buckets of Kanban body of knowledge that they are implementing. They're either implementing portfolio Kanban, or they see portfolio management with Kanban as a key driver. And of course, the second thing that they're implementing, upstream Kanban. So they're looking at Kanban not just from their own workflows, they're looking at it from other functions that they're impacted by. So let's look at these two aspects of it in more detail as part of the rest of the presentation. So let's look at portfolio Kanban firstly, which is essentially about aligning strategy to execution. Portfolio management in general, many of you, I'm sure, have come from portfolio management organizations, PMOs, or from a portfolio management background. And then you know that portfolio management by itself has always been a challenging or a tough discipline to implement in many organizations. On the one hand, it is a strategic, a complex subject area. It is somewhat more esoteric. It is not very well understood in organizations. It is, of course, typically involved with managing strategic initiatives or programs and projects, products or applications. It is applicable across different parts of the organization. And it handles these, what I call high value work items, high value engagement, high value activities that these organizations do or are responsible for. And therefore, there is always a associated complexity of managing from a financial perspective and other execution perspective. It is a combination of, let's say, what if analysis that portfolio managers do, which are related to financial cost and revenue aspects of these initiatives. It is associated with risk of doing something or not doing something. It is associated with allocating tasks, projects, and resources to these initiatives so that these initiatives get done. And finally, it is about opportunity cost of doing it or not doing it. Both of these have to be considered. And all of this brings to fore a lot of related disciplines of finance, project management, quality, and resources, which make it complex and difficult to manage. And therefore, executing portfolio management with traditional portfolio management, project management tools, which is what these tools are used to being used, has been very complex. If you dive down into it a little bit deeper, it has been complex because of course, the domain, the fact that it has been considered to be the domain of senior management, either the CXO organization or a PMO, which is reporting to a CIO or a CFO. Um, because of that, it is also difficult to propagate downwards and communicate to teams who are sort of busy with their day-to-day tasks and day-to-day management of work through their project plans. And associated with the portfolio management, there has always been tooling available, but very complex and very difficult to automate. And as a result, it has been difficult to communicate, to sort of have the strategic tooling communicate very effectively with the operational or the execution level tooling. And therefore, for the PMO, it has always been a challenge to keep leadership updated in terms of what is going on at the organizational level and what is the impact of that to the strategic initiative that they were managing at the portfolio level. As a result, portfolio management has been is a complex task, and portfolio organizations, portfolio managers or PMOs have always struggled to keep their organization updated in terms of what was the success of the portfolio initiatives that were being executed. So this is where portfolio Kanban makes an entry. Portfolio Kanban, along with enterprise services planning, I believe has provided a great deal of ease of managing your portfolios in a far more effective manner. And let's look at what are some of these features of portfolio Kanban that let you do this. So firstly, it provides a very simple and elegant alternative just because of the simplicity of the Kanban board and the visualization aspects of the Kanban board. Of all the different parameters that were considered in portfolio, typically in portfolio management, what I think Kanban does is it simplifies it down and abstracts it down to two key factors which all teams must focus on. One is your lead time of your actual performance as well as lead time to deliver something new. And the second is to consider the cost of delay. If you delay any of your strategic initiatives, if you can just focus on these two aspects of delivering your portfolio's performance, lead time and cost of delay, it actually helps everybody involved in managing portfolio in a far more comprehensive and a far more easier manner than to look at 100 different factors of managing your portfolios or rating your portfolios, etc. As an overall concept, it's easy to visualize, it is easy to communicate to the entire organization, and therefore it's also easy to track. It provides a top-down approach to driving organizational priorities. Typically, the portfolio Kanbans that we have seen have been an implementation of Kanban at three different levels: the strategic, the planning and coordination, and then the execution level. And then finally, it is typically associated with organization level lean and agile initiative, and therefore goes hand in hand with the existing sort of drive to implement lean and agile. And therefore, it ties in neatly with the overall the effort that the organization is making to implement Kanban. I'm going to share some examples of portfolio Kanban and the different contexts in which we have seen them being applied. One of the key things that we have seen in the last probably couple of years is this methodology that I believe originated from Google, is the OKR methodology, or the organizational key result areas. And some form of these have always existed. We have known KPIs, KPAs, etc. So a Kanban system that expands tracks the OKRs and then expands them into strategic initiatives that are done to meet those OKRs or to achieve those OKRs. And then those strategic initiatives are broken down into epics that are there to execute the initiatives. So at the top level, you might have a Kanban board that tracks the OKRs in terms of a backlog and then the workflow that it goes through. You may have a tactical level where you're managing the strategic initiatives, and perhaps have a somewhat similar workflow that manages those initiatives. And then at the lowermost level, at the epic level, you might have a more detailed workflow where you're tracking the completion, definition, prioritization, and completion of these initiatives. And all of these are connected with each other, where you have specific OKRs which are being tracked through specific strategic initiatives, and each of those initiatives will have one or more epics that are being worked on by different teams in order to meet this or complete those initiatives. So this is one very common example of a portfolio Kanban where you're looking at some level of a strategic milestone or a strategic deliverable, an OKR or a KPA or a KPI, that then expands to specific activities that need to be done to meet those OKRs. Another example, which is taken from our own internal way of working, is working with teams, campaigns, and deliverables in a marketing organization. So here, for example, I'm giving you a screenshot of our own marketing Kanban board, where at the top you see a portfolio lane that tracks the key marketing themes that we want to run in a particular time period, a particular year or a quarter. And then each of those themes is realized through marketing campaigns that we run to one or more campaigns that we run to meet those objectives of the themes. And under the campaigns, we may have a lot of deliverables that are being done to meet the objectives of those campaigns. So you can see the application of Kanban in different contexts: portfolio management in the traditional financial to execution context. In this screen here, I'm showing you a marketing context. And there are, of course, many other ways that you can use Kanban to manage portfolio, to program, to execution layers of your organization and your work. In general, portfolio Kanban makes it easy because it is a very visual method of managing your work. So here, for example, I want to show you a drill down into our marketing Kanban board, where you can look at a specific theme that we're managing, which is our email campaigns theme. Within a theme, we may have several campaigns that we will run during the year, and each of those campaigns might be a specific salesperson, a specific product, or a specific geography, etc. And then within each of those campaigns, we may have several deliverables where each of them represent a specific mailing activity. In a different context, you might have a standard software development environment where you break down epics to capabilities, to features, to user stories, which are being managed in different Kanban boards by different teams at different levels of granularity of workflow. The interesting thing is that the moment you define this visual structure, it becomes easy for everybody involved in the hierarchy to easily see what is going on across the entire organization. Right from the top level, what are the key OKRs or themes that are important to the organization that are being executed, down to all of the work that's being done to meet those objectives. And so for both sides, it becomes easy to get a very good and a clear visual picture. Also, you can see here that depending on the tool that you use, it also gives you a clear status of how much work has been completed, how much work is pending, where is the overall status of the work that's being done. So portfolio Kanban very easily and visually gives you a complete picture of the overall work being done across the organization, and for both sides, whether you're part of the leadership or whether you're part of the execution team that is doing the actual work. In addition to the visual aspects of Kanban, Kanban's enterprise services planning provides some very critical and very valuable additional tools that again make it very easy for organizations and leadership teams to decide what are the things that they need to prioritize. One of the key aspects of enterprise service planning is about risk management and demand shaping. So using a simple set of dimensions of your risk profile or opportunity profile, you can easily rate or assess your different initiatives that you're planning to do across various dimensions that you're likely to evaluate them on, and score these initiatives very easily using a simple tool like what the Swift ESP provides. Based on these, you can prioritize which are the initiatives that need to get prioritized for the next quarter, for the next year, etc., and make it easy for people to understand what were those dimensions, what were those parameters on the basis of which these selections were made. The second aspect of it is that it takes your lead time performance from your Kanban board, from your actual data that you have on your own execution, and uses that for giving you a clear picture of what you can expect to deliver at different levels of confidence. So based on the information that you get out of a module like a software like Swift ESP, is that you can very easily establish the level of confidence with which you can deliver a certain amount of work to your stakeholders, to your customers. And it is all based on a simple performance measure, which is your lead time performance. And then based on the cost of delay that you want to use, as well as your lead time performance, you can use that to then easily forecast when should you start something in order to be able to finish it without incurring or by minimizing the cost of delay that you might associate with a particular initiative. So Kanban in general abstracts your overall performance measurement or performance analysis of your portfolio down to your lead time performance and your cost of delay uh, curve that helps you easily decide which initiatives to take up, which initiatives to discard, because you're going to have very high cost of delay by doing it or by not doing it. So in general, portfolio Kanban is simple, visual, and elegant. It is applicable at any level. So you can start at the top and work your way to the bottom, or you can start at the bottom and work your way to the top. If you do it top down, then at any point wherever you need more detail, you can then break down that workflow stage and expand it to a different Kanban flow or a different Kanban board. And if you're starting bottom up, then at any point you can abstract certain stages of your workflow and bring it up into a higher level of Kanban in order to provide that higher level visibility. So you can, the key point here being that you can start either way and still implement portfolio Kanban very easily. And therefore, let's summarize the benefits of portfolio Kanban. On the one hand, from a leadership perspective, it gives an opportunity for leadership and for operational teams to engage together and to connect and get involved. Because clearly, the moment you define these different levels of Kanban board, you're actually physically connecting what is being planned at the strategic level to the work that is being done at the team level. As a result of that, you provide leadership an ability to prioritize and manage your strategic initiatives in a much more simple manner and help them answer the question, what do we do next? What are the next set of important things that we need to do? And thirdly, it gives the leadership a clear insight on how each of these initiatives are actually being executed, because they have a clear connection from the OKR down to work that is being done by the teams. So there is a clear connectivity established, which is very easy to grasp very visually. On the other hand, for the teams, it becomes a very easy way for them to understand, why am I doing what I'm doing? So it gives them a very clear context of why they exist as such. And at the middle level, for the departmental heads or the business unit leadership, it makes it very easy for them to collaborate with each other and to take care of bottlenecks, to take care of dependencies far more effectively. So if you take it from the context of the Kanban maturity model, it helps you, portfolio Kanban helps you very easily demonstrate level 3, level 4 behavior. So at the top level, it basically helps leadership answer the question of what we do and how we do it, and gives them the ability to relate it to the work being done by the operational level. And at the operational and the mid-management level, it gives them a clear picture of why we exist, what is the fundamental purpose of the work that they're doing, and gives them a sense of shared purpose. And at the same time, helps them explain to their customers and their stakeholders what is it that they're doing, how they're doing it, and what is the overall status of the work that is being done. These are all very clear level 3, level 4 behavior of the Kanban maturity model. And I believe because of that, it helps Kanban become far more sticky, because everybody is involved throughout the organization, right from top to bottom. And so in summary, like I was just saying, it helps you achieve far greater stickiness in terms of your implementation of Kanban, and helps everybody get a shared purpose of implementing Kanban and the benefit that you get from Kanban. And as a result, there is a far greater level of buy-in that leadership is able to then support with funding, with support for training and other investment that they need to do in order to truly implement Kanban successfully. Let's take the other aspect, which is upstream Kanban. What are some of the sort of characteristics of how upstream Kanban gets implemented? So firstly, Kanban in general encourages system thinking. It helps you understand that you are not just a single part of the overall workflow. There are other people that you depend on. There are other stakeholders that are depending on you. While traditional Agile, I believe, focus more on the dev aspect of software development and IT, and therefore had a fairly narrow focus. What has happened as a result of that is that Kanban, the teams that are sort of moving from Scrum to Kanban have have typically had a somewhat similar focus. So they also tended to initially focus on just their own delivery, their own the development work, etc. Uh, so while some of them were successful, many of them stagnated because of the challenges that we talked about earlier. Then they were not realizing the benefits of Kanban. So what are some of the attributes of the team that succeeded? Let's take a closer look at that. Some of the early signs of those who succeeded include some of these. Clearly, like we said earlier, these were teams that were not looking at their own portion of the value stream. They were also looking at an extended value stream and looking at agreements with their stakeholders. These agreements included what were the WIP limits that they were going to set for themselves, what was the level of detail and clarity that they needed in definition, what was going to be the prioritization process, uh, what would be some of the replacement and substitution policies that they would have, what would be some of the discard policies that they might have. These are all examples of policies that these teams implemented in association with, in discussion with their stakeholders. Uh, Another aspect of it was that they spent a far greater amount of effort to better manage their backlog and better ensure that the work that was coming to them in terms of their actual work items was in a far better state of definition, which required less clarifications, less back and forth between upstream and downstream in order to actually do their work. And so therefore, they showed other behaviors such as better organized replenishment meetings and better organized processes around managing the overall arrival of work into their Kanban boards. So in other words, these teams have realized that they are not alone and they alone cannot solve their problems. They needed to work with people who were whom they were being impacted by or whom they were going to impact. So they were part of an overall value chain or value stream where they had customers and they were customers themselves of some other people downstream. And they realized that in order to sort of ensure that their own policies work, they needed to have explicit agreements in place with their own stakeholders. And because of doing all of this, it enabled them powerfully to have some tough conversations up front with their own stakeholders as to what they could do and what was their capability to deliver the work or the overall demand that they were facing in terms of their work. Again, back to the concept of ESP, one of the key things that Kanban facilitates is get a clear picture of what is the capability that you have and what is the demand that you have, and be able to match the demand to the capability much more easily. So here I'm showing you again our own picture of how our inflow of work comes into our product teams, and what is the capability with which they deliver this work. And you can see that there is a difference between the way that work comes in versus the way that work goes out, because of the way that we are organized in terms of doing our work, in terms of different releases and different products that we do. Fortunately, as you can see here, we are reasonably balanced in the way that we are able to deliver our work. So therefore, we are able to manage. And it is, I think, thanks to implementing Kanban in a very organized manner that we are able to achieve this. So Kanban really helps you meet that demand versus capability equation much more effectively than otherwise. How do teams that are successful, how do they typically progress? I'm defining here the different stages of progression, and then I'll show you examples from our own evolution in Kanban to show you how this is done. So I think at the first stage, people may start with the simple visualization of their own process. In stage 2, which follows very quickly, they go to the definition of WIP limits and all the other internal policies that they may have. In the third stage, they look at policies that they need to define with their stakeholders and their customers. These 3 stages are most important for them to establish their place in the overall value stream and to understand the dependencies that they may have with their stakeholders or their customers. Once they do that, then they can look at the next stage of evolution, which is to look at the upstream process, where either you visualize that upstream process on your own Kanban board, or in the last stage where you may have a completely separate Kanban board to manage upstream processes, and you may have one or more of these boards. Unfortunately, I could not get some of our customer examples here, but I will share with you our own evolution over, I would say, at least 3 or 4 years as we started with implementing Kanban environment. In stage one, we visualize our own process. And as you can see here, unfortunately, I don't have a live picture of the board, but I do have the actual board that we had, where you can see that we started with a very simple and basic workflow for managing our workflow. In stage two, we definitely expanded and went beyond it to define our own policies of work and how we would move from one stage to the next. And as you can see here, clearly, we defined our WIP limits for each of the different workflow stages. So we definitely matured very quickly from our stage one to the stage two and defined these internal policies for our own work. Then we next went on to the next stage of defining policy with our stakeholders, where the dev team worked with the product owner and the product management function. And these are some of the examples of policies that we defined with our own stakeholders. So for example, we said a maximum of 10 new user stories at any point, or a maximum of 20 cards in our ready queue. This is one policy that we defined initially. We said that if the product owners wanted to add an 11th story, they would need to replace one of the 10 that was already in the ready queue. We said there would be no substitutions once a user story had started. So very clearly, once we had started doing work on something, we did not want to have to abort working on it, because that represented significant waste and slowdown of the work that is being done. And then from a handshake between the product management function and the dev function, we said that these were some of the minimum level of details we expected in user stories that were coming from the product owners. So we needed a functional description. We needed some level of UI. It could be simply a sketch. It could be a wireframe. It could be prototype. As much detail as possible, as much sophistication as possible. But there had to be a minimum sort of detail as far as UI is concerned. And then from a user experience perspective, we wanted to have some thought process around who were the personas that were going to use this feature, and based on the persona, what were going to be the impact in the system in terms of navigation and workflow. How was this feature to be implemented in such a way that it sat smoothly in the overall workflow that that specific persona was doing. So we needed this level of details in order to be able to work on the user stories successfully. So these are some of the examples of policies that we implemented when we defined these agreements between the product owners, product management function, and the dev team. From there, then we went on to implement a specific lane in the dev board for our product owners. So we called it the planning board. And as you can see here, we implemented some of the exact activities that they were doing in terms of sizing the work that had to be done, defining the specs, and then further doing some of the UI related work and so forth. And then it would go into a separate lane, which was the dev team's lane. We realized soon after this that this was not enough, and we had to actually make it even more detailed for our product owners or product management function to really work more effectively. And so from there, we went into an altogether separate board where we had a pretty detailed organization of how we wanted to think about our roadmap. So we defined our roadmap board into multiple swim lanes for different areas of work that we had to do, like a general roadmap, metrics and analytics, and I'll show you the other lanes that we had. And then each of them, we defined what were table stakes that we had to do, things where we probably were playing catch up with our competition, things that where we thought that if we build those would be differentiators and cool things for us, and things that were simply hygiene factors and had to be done so that our customers could use these very easily and in a smooth manner. These are some of the lanes that we had. So this is from some years back. And so you can see these are some of the key themes that we're working on at that point in time. And so we had swim lanes for each of these areas. So in general, Upstream Kanban helps the stakeholders respect and understand the delivery team's policies and help them achieve them far more effectively. Gives them greater understanding of the delivery team's capacity and capability, helps them respect WIP limits, both the minimum and maximum WIP limits, not just the maximum. Gives a better understanding of the delivery cadence. How often can delivery teams deliver and therefore do replenishments far more effectively? Helps them understand some of the biggest challenges dev teams face in terms of overburdening and large backlogs, and therefore overall ensures a smoother flow. As a result, both sides have a strong reason to stay invested in Kanban. And I think that is the big benefit that we see in Kanban. So in summary, what portfolio and upstream Kanban help us do is they result in better Kanban because of these factors. Organizations that have implemented portfolio and upstream Kanbans have benefited from the longer lasting Kanban initiatives. So Kanban stays there for a longer period of time with greater benefits to the overall organization, greater clarity of purpose for the overall organization as to why they're doing this, better understanding and the basic principles of the Kanban method. So clearly, teams that implement these have a far greater understanding of how to implement these principles and therefore benefit in a far more effective manner. And they're not affected by the departure of one or two individuals because it is being implemented at the organization level by far more people than just one or two people. And as a result, portfolio upstream Kanban get leadership much more involved. So organizations with senior management involvement are more likely to have a greater organizational buy-in to Kanban, wider adoption at the early stages of implementation of Kanban, better and lasting, better budgets and lasting sort of investments in Kanban, especially in terms of training and awareness of Kanban principles, and like I said, better funding support, and finally, therefore, a deeper and wider implementation of Kanban. Of course, the question remains: which came first? Does the upstream Kanban and portfolio Kanban get implemented when you have better Kanban implementation, or do upstream and portfolio Kanban help you get to better Kanban implementation? This is, I think, still a matter of debate, but our belief is that it is really the latter. That if you start your Kanban implementations with portfolio Kanban and upstream Kanban, it gets better outcomes at the end. So here I'm sharing just a couple of examples from our customers. This is a quote that has come directly from one of our customers. This is Leila Nakashima. She's the director of planning and strategy at Luiza Labs in Sao Paulo. And as you can see here, she's saying that portfolio Kanban and upstream Kanban really helped them, especially in this current crisis, because they had to suddenly change a lot of strategy around moving from physical to the virtual world. This is a large retail organization in Brazil, and they were able to really move things online and move to online commerce far more effectively because of the fact that they were using Kanban for a number of years, and they were able to switch strategies and change initiatives far more easily than they would have been able to do otherwise. Here is another example from a senior manager of engineering in telecom customer of ours. Unfortunately, I cannot share the name. I did not get the permission to do that. But they said that because of their doing upstream Kanban, they were able to achieve clarity for the work that their dev teams were doing. And as a result, their dev teams were able to achieve far greater improvement in terms of lead time and throughput, which of course made their management and their customers very happy. So you can see that both of these are great support for the fact that upstream and portfolio Kanban help in effective implementation of Kanban. So with that, I'm going to stop here and take any questions. Let me know if there are any. And for those of you, if you have any questions on my topic, you can reach me here. And of course, I'm happy to discuss these in more detail with anyone who's interested in knowing more about our custom implementations of Kanban. With that, I would like to close my discussion here, my topic here. Thank you very much for attending the session today.
Well, thank you very much, Mahesh. It's excellent. The two topics that are quite important, portfolio and upstream Kanban, as we move on to more advanced maturities. So great to see you.
Thank you very much.
All right.
Likewise.
So we've got quite a few questions. Hi there. Yeah. So we've got quite a few questions now. Start with just a first one. How do you mitigate that people design their Kanban boards with a task orientation and not doing it with a service orientation? What are some of the things you've seen with that?
That's a great point. Like I said, the tendency to have Kanban boards represent or replace their earlier task management type of a organization of managing their work, that tends to initially flow over to the Kanban board as well. And so therefore, all of the basic task definitions that were being used earlier continue to sort of focus on, and we continue to transfer to the Kanban board as well. And I think the most effective way that we have seen the move from being tasked to more a deliverable based approach has been to look at the portfolio Kanban type of a definition, where you're looking at not the uh, plan or not the planning task, but the actual deliverable that you're supposed to achieve, and breaking down the deliverable into its lower level, sub deliverables, I guess is the best way to put it. So an epic breaks down into user stories, or an epic breaks down into features, and features break down into user stories, which are not tasks. So the moment you start to think of it in those ways, you are now focusing on the deliverable rather than on the actual task. And I think to that extent, I would say that the upstream Kanban, or rather the portfolio Kanban, which helps you do the top-down breakdown of your deliverable, helps you move away from a task orientation to a deliverable orientation. Hopefully that answers the
That's
question.
great. Yeah, no, that's great. Great. And I think you brought this out in the context of the Kanban maturity model as well, as that the topics that you're talking about are more in that level 3 to level 4 implementation of maturity. And so we talk about the challenge of overreaching, trying to take on too much too fast when you're really not ready for going to that level. Have you found when you brought in portfolio the people that want portfolio, are they really ready for it, or sometimes are they overreaching, or are there levels of portfolio implementation that are still work quite well in some form in a lower maturity organization? So I'm just sort of curious as to what you found in your actual implementations of the portfolio.
So I think firstly what I've seen is that it is the organizations that are implementing portfolio Kanban are those that have already been used to it to some extent. So they are already um, thinking along those lines. So they have got some level of uh, planning cycles in their overall work processes that allows them to implement what they were doing in terms of top down planning, quarterly as well as annual planning based overall thinking about their work. So to that extent, I'd say that even if the organization is sort of low maturity from a Kanban perspective, the fact that they were already sort of thinking top down in terms of the way that they saw their work being prioritized, I don't think that I have seen that they were overreaching. There may be a simpler implementation of portfolio Kanban in those organizations because they're not yet thought through um, all of the things that Kanban can now enable them in terms of delivering the work. But so I would say that the way that they model the portfolio Kanban boards and the number of hierarchies, a number of levels in the hierarchy, etc., they might be simpler ones to more complex or more sophisticated ones. But no, I don't think that. I think, in fact, it enables the lower maturity organizations also to think along those lines and perhaps get them to higher level maturity faster because they're thinking about portfolio Kanban.
Okay, great. And this next question probably is a perspective on an organization that is at low maturity but thinks they're trying to put a portfolio management in. The comment is, portfolio management often starts out with the question of what the business needs, but gradually the whole thing gets reduced to the logic of justifying return on investment, where practically the only thing that survives is cost savings by headcount reduction through automation. How can we change the conversation at the portfolio level to allow quality and productivity objectives to survive the budgeting process? And this, to some extent, ties into the whole upstream as well. So just your thoughts on what you've experienced there.
So I think that question, I think, refers nicely to the implementation of the Kanban principles for the folks who are upstream, right? So if you really start to look at how do you prioritize initiatives and how do you look at implementing it at the highest level. Don't worry about the what the teams are doing and what the sort of priorities are at the lower level. If you look at just the actual time to deliver initiatives at the highest level and look at the cost of delay of those initiatives, I think Kanban, implementing Kanban at the higher levels actually helps you prioritize better what you should be doing. And if cost reduction is one of the initiatives, well, it would probably reflect in the way that the initiatives get prioritized. But I think very quickly those leadership teams or those upstream functions or stakeholders will realize that that's not helping them meet their ultimate objectives or helping them become a more or a less fragile organization, let's say. So I think there might be some, initial turmoil, initial settling in, so to speak. But once they kind of get used to the fundamental principles of Kanban about how do you, what are some of the underlying principles as to how you prioritize initiatives, I think it will help them actually achieve far greater outcomes based on the fact that they use Kanban at the highest level as well, that is upstream or portfolio level as well.
All right, great. So we got a question here. Starting from the concept of value stream, how do you guarantee that the whole team participates on the end-to-end of the value stream and have a shared vision of the workflow?
So I think the companies that have done a top-down approach, I think they have automatically involved all the teams that are there in the overall value stream. Whereas if you look at the upstream approach, where a team might look at their own workflow and they're looking at maybe the immediate upstream function, there it's a somewhat elongated process. But the fact is that they are both teams are aware of the fact that they are not the only people in the overall value stream. Either the management is driving it, leadership is driving it, or I refer to the center of excellence. So they are the people who are kind of acting as the glue to saying, hey, here is the overall value stream. Here is how we're going to implement Kanban, coming top down to each of the different functions in the overall value stream. And in the other example where it is the operational team or the execution team that's thinking about just their own stakeholders, they're also aware of the fact that they've got other people that that are dependent on them or that they might be impacting. I think that greater awareness is what helps them get other functions involved in the overall value stream, and I think that level of let's say I would call it maturity, I guess, is already ingrained in the organization in some ways or the other, whether it came from their earlier principles or earlier practices of managing their portfolios and therefore being able to relate to the work that other teams were doing and their own dependence on them, or the implementation of Kanban principles, which help them understand that yes, as they're implementing their own policies, those policies depend on agreements with their upstream functions as well, and the same way with the downstream functions as well. So the ability to think clearly about what their own policies need to be and their impact or the impact on those policies of other people's work habits or other systems that they needed to be delivering to, that I think help them think through the overall value stream more naturally or more effectively.
All right, great. Question here is, what triggers have you seen that get senior leaders to understand and become deeply involved in Kanban implementations? We know it's very common for leadership to see agile and improvement as something that is the responsibility of the teams and just push it down. So what do you see there?
So again, it is common, unfortunately, that the leadership teams don't get involved because teams are implementing Kanban, at their level, and we've seen a whole range of organizations from companies that have large companies that have implemented and have remained at the team level for the longest time, and different teams across different functions have a completely different style of using Kanban to improve their overall, life in general. But there has been, as long as they have sort of sustained the implementation of Kanban, there has ultimately been awareness built up at maybe a business unit level leadership, and then going on to higher levels of leadership around that, to say, hey, there is a whole set of teams that are implementing Kanban and benefiting from it. What are they doing right that we need to look at implementing elsewhere? So that's been the slow, gradual, and I would say from a Kanban practitioner perspective, a more painful way to sort of get there. But perhaps that each organization is different, and therefore that's what works for them. But there are those few organizations which we have seen, including I mentioned earlier about Louisa Labs, probably one of the most effective implementations of Kanban that we've seen, and I believe that it's going to be true for them for many years to come. It is the implementation of or the decision to implement lean as an overall organization, to implement benefits of lean across the business functions as well, that drives them to do everything at an overall organization level. So they're not happy with just doing it for one part of the organization. They're doing it for the whole organization, and it's because they've already seen the benefits of lean and agile at a sort of global level within the organization, and therefore that helps them remain focused on the fact that this has to be a organization-wide implementation, and therefore it has to be implemented, or it has to be effected across the overall value stream. So in some, it is sort of the top-down center of excellence-driven approach. In some, it is the sort of gradual team by team.
Okay, thank you very much for an excellent talk.